all right, so let's play the other side a little bit, just to be
Yeah.
fair and honest and explore it, right? There's something to be said, some people would say, and maybe there's even truth to this, that period you went through, right? 14 to 19 or whatever, where you're like, this just
Mhm.
fucking feels good. I'm just gonna do it. I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
why do I give a shit? There's something about like the ability to control ourselves, the ability to do hard things and not just give in, because it's so easy to just give in to the easy things. And sometimes that's what makes people assholes, because the easy thing is to be a dick to somebody or to treat somebody
Yeah.
poorly, right? So there's a benefit to being able to not just be like, I want to do what feels good all the time. And I don't
Mhm.
think that's what you're saying necessarily. I think there's a
No.
distinction there, right?
Yeah.
But I just wanted you to, yeah, talk about that a little bit.
I've always just been very disciplined, I think. So I've never really felt myself getting out of control. I think the only time I've ever been out of control in my lifetime was like after my first dog died, and
Mm,
like, ooh,
mm,
ooh, I was an alcoholic for a little bit,
mm,
and I actually had alcohol withdrawals. But other than that, I mean, and not everyone has this, but I've always just had such severe discipline that I wasn't worried about, like, oh, am I just going to have sex all the time? Am I going to become an addict? Am I going to
mhm,
just do a lot of dumb shit? Like, even looking back at the stuff I did in high school, like, I was pretty crazy. And I still don't think that I was out of control or I was wild. Cause like my like sophomore and junior year, I had like a 3.8 GPA or something like that. Like, I was chilling.
mm, mm,
Um, and I guess some people would be worried about, like, well, what if you're that young and like you become pregnant? And even back then, I knew I didn't want kids. So, like, my first thought was abortion, abortion, abortion. I'm never having a kid. I
mm,
still don't want them. I'm going to probably get my tubes tied in the next year or two.
mm, mm.
I'm sorry, am I going off track? I kind of lost
No,
track of like, what the
no,
question was.
there is no off track on this show. That's one of the
Yeah.
benefits of this platform. So you don't ever have to worry about that. No, 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 you're not off track at all. And it's we were on the point of like, and again, there's a philosophical question of this. Like, do you think that's the point of life, is to feel the best we can? Like,
A
to just
thousand
feel
percent.
good? Kind of
I
has to
think
be, right?
I think it has to be, but there's also the flip side of that. To like deal with your trauma is probably like one of the low points that you're gonna have in your life. Because to release your trauma, one, your body's going through a lot. I've been in a phase right now where I'm releasing a lot of trauma and I'm just exhausted constantly. Like, I want to sleep
Mm,
10 hours a day. I take a lot of naps. I am exhausted. But I know the other side of that. I've like seen glimpses and I'm like, I have never felt this good and I've never had that much energy. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just keep pushing, because like I want to have the best 2023 ever. My 2022 was already pretty shitty with the mold poisoning. So I'm like, all right, let's just keep it going so
mm,
2023 can be awesome. But I do think the point of life is to feel good and to like do something with yourself. And what felt good when I was like 14, 15, 16, even in college doesn't feel good now. So I have to focus on what feels good now.
mm,
And part of me still holds on to that, like, oh my God, I was having so much fun when I was 19, 20, 21. But I also drank a lot then and it wasn't really healthy. And now I don't drink. So, I mean, I drink like maybe 4 times a year
mm, mm.
at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I think good is an interesting word in that too, because everybody's got a different definition of good. And I think that's why
Yeah.
your value is so important, right? It's like, it's the good that's true to you. Like, that
Yeah.
has to be the point of life, to be that good. Because, right, we could shoot up heroin, we could do all sorts of different things that might make you feel good technically in that moment, but
They're
that
not good for
authentic
you.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
You
And it
want
makes
to be,
you get,
oh, sorry.
no, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
There's like such a big difference between what feels good in the moment and what can feel and what is actually good for you. And that's something that the older I get, the more I can distinguish. Because alcohol, it might feel really good in the moment, but the next day it doesn't feel good. And then I do embarrassing shit. And then it's definitely not good for me or like good for my soul. So it's like mushrooms. I've been able to be like, they are good for me. They're good for my soul. Everything about them is great. And there's some stuff that's good for you that isn't fucking fun. Like, every day I try to carve out an hour. I literally put it in my calendar where I do yoga to help bring my anxiety down. And is it fun? No, but it's so good for me that it's
Mm,
like worth it in the end. But then it takes that discipline that, I mean, I'm very disciplined and it's still pretty hard for me to be like, okay, I know this makes me feel good and it's not fun, but we're going to do this right now because
mm,
it's going to be amazing afterwards.
mm. So true.
Um,
So true.
yeah.
I find too, like, if you could, because you're right, there's those two, if you could find certain things that bring both of those goodnesses, like that base level, like I just fucking enjoy it and love doing this, plus it's good for you, that's kind
Mhm.
of like for me, this podcast is kind of that. Like I genuinely love doing it. I love having the conversations, and I know it makes me a better person because it gives me perspective. It makes me question things about myself and how I view the world. That's kind of like the epitome of it, I think, of that goodness
Yeah.
that we seek. So yeah, I get it. I agree. To me, it has to be about that. And I do think so. When I did that first episode, and my value, I positioned it as thoughtfully authentic, and by that I meant like feeling good, check, totally agree. Authentic, check, totally agree. I think there's one more piece of it, which we touched on a little bit already, which is like, have I been thoughtful to make sure that this isn't harming somebody else in some way, or that there's no other like implication to this? I think that's
Mhm.
important just because our minds are flawed again, and we can easily go astray and convince ourselves like, well, I'm just being me and this feels good, but you're being a shitty person to somebody else, you know? So I think
Yeah.
that piece, you get all those together, you're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah. So I kind of have to ignore the part of does what I do hurt other people? Because
That's interesting.
I know what I do hurts my parents and I know what embarrasses them to their core. But if I didn't do sex work and if I wasn't doing what I do, I would be significantly less happy.
Can I
So
press on that for a second? Because I think that's
yeah.
interesting. That's interesting because that's a really good test of it. And I would say that sure, it does hurt them, but there's like a logical thread to it where you can go a step deeper and be like, but it shouldn't hurt them, arguably, right? At least where you
That's
see
what
it.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah. Like it's not like I'm purposely trying to hurt, like, oh my God, my dad is gonna be so pissed. This is awesome. It's almost the opposite where I'm like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't find out, which he did. But like I was like very scared of that. But I don't do anything to like purposely hurt other people, but it's kind of inevitable sometimes if you're going to be yourself and if you're going to do what you love to do, because there's all these people that are like they want to judge you or they want you to be this version of you that they made up in their head, which is I noticed a lot with my parents.
In the spirit of the happiness, the feeling good, I think we're both on the same page in that in many ways. Is there
Mhm.
a line? Like, is there a line there where we should say, again, philosophical question, as like a society, because the extreme I often go to, right? I'm not comparing anything in any ways. It's just the way my mind goes is like, let's say I'm
Mhm.
a pedophile. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, it makes me feel really good to be with kids. Like most people look at that and be like, well, you can't. And you could say, well, you're harming a kid. But just to use that as the example, like if we extrapolate that concept out, how do we identify that line of where like, well, that's too far. Even if it makes you feel good, you can't do that.
I think the line, for example, with like a pedophile or someone who kills people is like this emotional trauma that you're putting on other people. I mean, someone could even argue with my OnlyFans that I am being emotionally traumatic to someone else, but am I emotionally manipulating someone? Am I isolating someone? Am I doing these things that I know are bad, even though it makes me happy? I'm not doing any of that. I'm being very authentic to who I am. And someone who's a fucking pedophile, they're over here manipulating a little kid
Mm,
to fall in love with them and to like be this person for them. Like a serial killer, a serial rapist, like they are very manipulative and conniving and they do hurt people even if it makes them happy or even if it's not their intention to do this.
mm,
That is what they're doing.
mm.
So there is that line of like, well, are like it goes back to authenticity. Are you being authentic to who you are to like get what you want out of that situation?
Yeah, it's such a subjective. I mean, obviously, rapists, pedophiles, we can all sit here and obviously look at that and be like, that's horrific.
Yeah.
But as you start to walk back from that, it does start to get really subjective. And I think that's why we have such a tough time throughout. I mean, today I know we're really divided as a country and a people and humanity and all that, but it's been throughout history. And I think it's in large part because of that, because it's just like everybody's got a different perspective. Everybody sees it differently. Everybody sees that line differently. And how do you define hurting somebody and all that? Even in your cases, you're talking about, I would imagine religious people would hear it and be like, you are hurting people. You're disrespecting God, right? There's 1,000 different perspectives you could have as to why it's good, bad, or indifferent. And that's
Mhm.
what fascinates me about life. And there's no conclusion to it.